Welcome back, my friends. Today, we are going to listen to the powerful story of the Halifax Explosion, one of the most devastating disasters in Canadian history. This is not only a story about two ships, a harbor, and one terrible explosion. It is also a story about war, warning, fear, rescue, courage, loss, and a city that had to rebuild itself from ruins. On the morning of December 6th, 1917, people in Halifax woke up like it was another ordinary winter day. But before the morning was over, part of the city would be destroyed. At that time, the world was in the middle of World War I. Halifax, in Nova Scotia, was one of the most important ports in Canada. Ships moved through its harbor, carrying soldiers, supplies, weapons, food, and materials for the war effort. The harbor was busy, serious, and full of movement. To many people, Halifax was not only a city by the sea, it was a doorway between North America and the war across the Atlantic. Ships came and went, and the people of Halifax lived with the sound of engines, whistles, trains, workers, sailors, and military activity. But a busy harbor can also be dangerous. Many ships had to move through narrow water. Some carried ordinary goods. Some carried war supplies. Some carried dangerous cargo. During wartime, pressure was high. Schedules mattered. Ships needed to move quickly. Communication had to be clear. One mistake could create disaster. On that cold morning, two ships entered a story that would change Halifax forever. One ship was the SS Mont-Blanc, a French cargo ship. It was carrying a large amount of explosives for the war. This cargo was extremely dangerous. It included materials that could burn, explode, and destroy anything nearby if something went wrong. The other ship was the SS Imo, a Norwegian vessel. The two ships were moving in Halifax Harbour. In an area known as the Narrows, this waterway connected the outer harbor with Bedford Basin. It was an important route, but it was not wide enough for careless movement. The morning began with normal life around the city. Children were preparing for school. Workers were going to their jobs. Families were cooking breakfast. People near the harbor may have looked out at the water as they had done many times before. The air was cold. Winter was near. Smoke rose from homes and factories. Trains moved. Horses pulled wagons. Ships passed through the harbor. Most people did not know that one of those ships was carrying enough explosives to destroy a large part of the city. Then the Mont-Blanc and the Imo came dangerously close. There was confusion about direction, speed, and right-of-way in a harbor. Small decisions matter. A turn made too late, a signal misunderstood, or a ship moving too fast can become serious. The two vessels collided. At first, the collision itself was not the full disaster. The real danger was what happened next. The Mont-Blanc caught fire. This fire was terrifying because of the cargo inside the ship. The crew of the Mont-Blanc understood the danger. They knew the ship could explode. They tried to warn others and escape. But many people on shore did not understand what they were seeing. A burning ship in the harbor was dramatic. It drew attention. People came to windows. Some went outside. Some watched from buildings, streets, and homes. They did not know that looking toward the harbor was one of the most dangerous things they could do. Imagine standing near a window that morning. You see smoke rising from the harbor. You hear shouting. Maybe you see flames. Maybe you think it is a serious fire. but not the end of the city. You call someone else to look. A child comes closer. A worker stops. A neighbor points toward the water. In those minutes, curiosity was natural, but the danger was invisible to most people. The ship was not just burning. It was becoming a massive bomb. The fire continued. The Mont-Blanc drifted. Time was running out. Some people tried to spread warnings, but there was not enough time for everyone to understand. The city was too close. The harbor was too busy. The danger was too great. Then, at about 9 o'clock in the morning, the Mont Blanc exploded. The blast was enormous. It destroyed buildings, shattered windows, threw people to the ground, and sent a powerful shock wave across the city. A huge cloud rose into the sky. Fire spread. Debris flew through the air. Homes, schools, factories, churches, and streets were damaged or destroyed. For many people, the world changed in 1 second. A normal morning became smoke, fire, broken glass, screams, dust, and silence. The north end of Halifax suffered terribly. Many people were killed. Thousands were injured. Many lost their homes. Some people were blinded by flying glass because they had been watching the burning ship through windows. Others were trapped under broken buildings. Families were separated. Children searched for parents. Parents searched for children. In a few moments, the city became a place of shock and pain, but the disaster did not end with the explosion. Fires burned. Winter, cold, made suffering worse. Roads were blocked by debris. Hospitals were overwhelmed. Doctors, nurses, soldiers, volunteers, neighbors, and rescue workers had to act quickly. People pulled survivors from ruins. They carried the injured through broken streets. They searched for the missing. They gave blankets, shelter, food, and medical help. In the middle of destruction, human courage began to appear. This is the first lesson from the Halifax explosion. A disaster often begins before the moment everyone remembers. It begins with pressure, risk, confusion, and small decisions that come together. The explosion was sudden, but the conditions were already there. A wartime harbor, dangerous cargo, narrow water, busy movement, and people who did not know how close danger was. The morning Halifax changed forever, began like an ordinary day. That is why the story is so powerful. History does not always warn people before it arrives. Sometimes it comes through smoke on the water, a fire people do not understand, and one terrible moment that changes a city for generations. To understand the Halifax explosion, we need to look closely at the two ships that met in the harbor that morning. A disaster this large did not happen because of one simple mistake. It happened because wartime pressure, dangerous cargo, narrow water, communication problems, and human decisions came together in the wrong place at the wrong time. The ships were not just objects moving through water. Each one carried a story, a purpose, and a risk. The first ship was the SS Mont-Blanc. It was a French cargo ship, and it had arrived near Halifax during World War I. Its cargo was extremely dangerous. It carried explosives meant for the war in Europe. These materials were not ordinary supplies. They were powerful enough to destroy buildings, ships, streets, and lives if they caught fire and exploded. The people who understood the cargo knew that the Mont Blanc was not just another ship. It was a floating danger, but to most people on shore, The Mont-Blanc looked like any other cargo vessel. From a distance, ordinary citizens could not see what was hidden inside. They could see a ship. They could see smoke later. They could see fire, but they could not see the explosive materials. This is one reason the disaster became so deadly. The greatest danger was hidden. People reacted to what they could see, not to what they could not understand. The second ship was the SS Imo, a Norwegian vessel. It was not carrying the same kind of explosive cargo, but it became part of the disaster because of how it moved through the harbor that morning. Halifax Harbour was busy during the war. Ships had to follow routes and signals. The Narrows, where the collision happened, was not a wide-open ocean. It was a tighter passage. In such a place, timing and direction mattered. A small misunderstanding could quickly become serious. On the morning of December 6th, 1917, the Imo was moving through the harbor. The Mont-Blanc was also entering the same waterway. There was confusion between the two vessels. Each ship had its own movement, speed, and expectation. Signals were exchanged, but the situation did not become clear enough in time. In a harbor, there is not always much space to correct a mistake. A ship does not stop immediately. A large vessel moves with weight and momentum. Once danger is close, seconds matter. The two ships collided in the Narrows. The collision itself damaged the Mont-Blanc. But the greater problem came after. Sparks and fire began. The dangerous cargo inside the Mont-Blanc turned the situation from a harbor accident into a citywide threat. The crew of the Mont-Blanc understood the terrible risk. They knew that if the fire reached the explosives, the ship could explode with unimaginable force. For them, the danger was immediate and clear. The crew tried to escape. They abandoned the burning ship and moved away from it. This detail can seem strange to someone who does not know the situation. Why leave a burning ship? Why not stay and fight the fire? But the crew understood that the cargo made the fire almost impossible to control safely. Staying too close could mean death. Their choice was not simple cowardice. It was the reaction of people who knew exactly what kind of danger was inside the vessel. Meanwhile, people on shore began to notice the burning ship. Smoke rose from the harbor. Flames could be seen. A burning ship is dramatic, especially in a busy city. People stopped working. Children looked out. Families came to windows. Workers gathered where they could see the harbor. Some may have thought they were watching a rare but interesting accident. Others may have felt worried, but not terrified. Most did not know that the ship was full of explosives. This misunderstanding made the disaster worse. If everyone had known the true danger, they might have run away from windows, moved farther inland, or taken cover. But there was no clear citywide warning that reached everyone in time. The fire looked like a spectacle. Many people moved toward the danger with their eyes, even if their bodies stayed inside homes or workplaces. Windows became deadly because the blast would soon turn glass into flying knives. The Mont-Blanc drifted after the collision. The burning ship moved closer to the shore, near the Richmond area, in the north end of Halifax. That area had homes, factories, railway facilities, and working-class neighborhoods. Many ordinary families lived there. They had no reason to imagine that a ship in the harbor could erase their streets in a single morning. But the danger was now moving toward them. Inside the ship, the fire continued. Heat grew. Explosive materials became more unstable. The clock was moving toward disaster. This is one of the most frightening parts of the story. There was a gap between the beginning of danger and the explosion itself. During that time, the city still had life. People were still breathing, watching, talking, working, and wondering. Some were close enough to escape, if they had understood. Others had no chance. History sometimes creates a terrible silence before the moment of destruction. This is the second lesson from the Halifax explosion. Danger is not always obvious to the people who are closest to it. The crew knew the Mont-Blanc was deadly, but many citizens saw only smoke and flames. In a disaster, information can be as important as strength. If the right warning reaches people early enough, lives can be saved. If it does not, ordinary curiosity can become fatal. The two ships had met in the harbor. The dangerous cargo had caught fire. The burning vessel was drifting near the city. And in those final minutes before the blast, Halifax stood on the edge of one of the worst disasters Canada had ever known. At about 9:04 in the morning, the burning Mont-Blanc exploded. In one instant, the quiet winter morning became fire, pressure, noise, broken wood, broken glass, smoke, and death. The blast was so powerful that people far from the harbor felt it. Buildings shook, windows shattered, doors flew open, walls collapsed. A huge cloud rose into the sky. For many people in Halifax, there was no time to understand what had happened. 1 second, they were watching smoke from the harbor. The next second, their world was gone. The explosion destroyed much of the north end of Halifax, especially the Richmond area. This was a working-class neighborhood with homes, factories, railway buildings, churches, schools, and families. Many people there lived close to the harbor because their work was connected to ships, railways, and industry. They were ordinary people, living ordinary lives. But because they were close to the Mont-Blanc, they suffered the worst damage. Houses were crushed, roofs were torn away, streets were filled with debris. Fires began in many places. The city looked as if war had arrived inside Canada itself. The force of the blast threw people through the air. Some were killed instantly. Others were trapped under collapsed buildings. Many were injured by flying glass. This became one of the most terrible parts of the disaster. Before the explosion, many people had gone to windows to watch the burning ship. When the blast came, the windows shattered inward. Glass flew into faces and eyes. Many people were blinded or badly wounded. A moment of curiosity became a life-changing injury. Children were among the victims. Some were at home. Some were going to school. Some were standing near windows with their families. In disasters, numbers can feel large and distant, but each number was a person, a child with a name, a mother calling from another room, a father at work, a neighbor stepping outside to see the smoke. The Halifax explosion was not only a public disaster, it entered private homes and broke private lives. The explosion also created a powerful wave in the harbor. Water rose and rushed outward. Ships were damaged. Boats were thrown. The harbor itself became part of the violence. The Mont-Blanc disappeared as a ship, but pieces of it were thrown across the area. Heavy metal fragments landed far away. The power of the blast was almost impossible for people to imagine. It came from one ship, but it struck like a weapon against the city. After the explosion, there was confusion everywhere. Dust filled the air. Smoke covered parts of the city. People could not see clearly. Some could not hear because the blast had damaged their ears. Others wandered through the streets in shock, covered in blood, ash, or broken glass. Some called the names of family members. Some carried children. Some searched through ruins with their bare hands. The normal sounds of a city were replaced by crying, shouting, fire, and the crack of broken buildings. Hospitals were quickly overwhelmed. Doctors and nurses had to treat more injured people than they could easily handle. Some patients had deep cuts. Some had burns. Some had broken bones. Some had eye injuries. Some were in shock and could not explain who they were or where they lived. Medical workers had to make fast decisions. They worked under terrible pressure, often with limited space and supplies. The disaster did not give them time to prepare. Rescue work began almost immediately. Soldiers, sailors, police officers, firefighters, railway workers, doctors, nurses, and ordinary citizens all tried to help. People pulled survivors from destroyed homes. They carried the injured to hospitals, churches, schools, and any building that could become a shelter. Some searched for people, trapped under wood and brick. Others fought fires before they could spread farther. In many places, neighbors saved neighbors before official help arrived. But the city faced another fear. After the first explosion, some people worried that more explosions might come. Halifax was a wartime port, and people knew the harbor could contain other dangerous materials. Rumors spread quickly. In a disaster, fear often moves faster than facts. Some people ran away from the harbor. Some left damaged homes even in the cold. Others stayed because they were looking for loved ones. The city was full of movement, panic, and uncertainty. The weather made everything worse. It was winter in Nova Scotia. Many people had lost their homes, clothing, windows, heat, and shelter. Injured people lay in cold streets or damaged buildings. Families needed warmth, food, medicine, and a place to sleep. Fires gave danger, but the cold gave another kind of suffering. A city can survive damage, but people also need immediate care. Without shelter, the injured and homeless faced more danger after the blast. The explosion also affected nearby Dartmouth. Across the harbor, the damage there was not the same everywhere, but the shock wave and wave from the harbor caused destruction and loss. This shows how large the disaster really was. It was not just one street or one building. It was a harbor disaster, a city disaster, and a human disaster that touched many communities at once. This is the third lesson from the Halifax explosion. The worst disasters do not end when the loudest sound is over. The explosion lasted only a moment, but its effects continued in broken homes, injured bodies, lost families, fires, cold streets, and years of memory. The blast destroyed part of Halifax, but the suffering after the blast required courage, organization, and compassion. In the middle of this destruction, one story would become especially powerful. Before the explosion, a railway dispatcher named Vincent Coleman understood that trains were still coming toward danger. He stayed long enough to send a warning. His message helped stop others from entering the disaster zone, and his courage became one of the most remembered parts of the Halifax story. In the story of the Halifax explosion, one name is remembered with deep respect: Vincent Coleman. He was a railway dispatcher working near the harbor. His job was to help manage train movement and communication. On the morning of December 6, 1917, he was close enough to understand that the burning Mont-Blanc was not an ordinary harbor fire. The ship was carrying explosives. If it exploded, the railway area and the city around it would be in terrible danger. Coleman first had a chance to leave. He was warned about the danger, and like any person, he could have run for his life. But then he remembered something important. Trains were still coming toward Halifax. One passenger train from St. John, New Brunswick, was heading toward the city. If it arrived near the harbor at the wrong time, many more people could die. Coleman understood that someone had to send a warning. The danger was close. But the message had to go out, so he returned to his telegraph key. Imagine that moment outside. Smoke rises from the harbor. The burning ship is drifting. People are shouting. The air is full of fear and confusion. Coleman knows the ship may explode at any moment. But instead of escaping, he stays long enough to send a warning over the telegraph line. His message told others to stop the trains because a ship full of ammunition was on fire in the harbor. This act became one of the most powerful stories of the disaster. Coleman did not stop the explosion. No one could stop it by then. But his warning helped prevent trains from entering the danger zone. It likely saved lives. He gave up his chance to escape, so others could have a chance to live. In a disaster, heroism is sometimes quiet. It is not always a person fighting with a weapon or standing before a crowd. Sometimes, it is one person doing his duty in the final minutes. When the explosion came, Vincent Coleman was killed, but his message survived. His story became part of Halifax memory because it shows the human choice inside tragedy. A disaster can reveal fear, confusion, and weakness, but it can also reveal courage. Coleman's final warning reminds us that even in a moment of terror, one clear action can matter. After the blast, rescue work became urgent. Halifax was full of injured people, destroyed homes, fires, broken streets, and families searching for each other. Doctors and nurses were overwhelmed. Hospitals filled quickly. Churches, schools, and public buildings became emergency shelters or treatment spaces. People used whatever they had: blankets, wagons, doors, boards, bondage, water, food, and their own hands. The city did not have enough time to prepare. It had to respond while still bleeding. Many ordinary citizens became rescuers. Some people pulled neighbors from collapsed homes. Some carried children through smoke and snow. Some searched ruins even when more danger was possible. Firefighters and soldiers worked in damaged streets. Medical workers treated terrible injuries, especially cuts from flying glass and burns from fire. In many cases, people helped strangers because there was no time to ask who someone was. There was only need. The winter weather made rescue harder. Snow and cold arrived soon after the disaster, adding more suffering to a city already broken. People without homes needed shelter quickly. Broken windows meant freezing rooms. Injured people needed warmth. Families who had lost everything needed food, clothing, and a place to sleep. The explosion had destroyed buildings in seconds, but keeping people alive afterward required days, weeks, and months of effort. Help began to arrive from other places. Across Canada, people sent support, medical teams, supplies, money, and workers came to help Halifax recover. One of the most remembered sources of help came from Boston. In the United States, Boston responded quickly with doctors, nurses, supplies, and relief. This help created a lasting bond between Halifax and Boston. Even today, Nova Scotia sends a Christmas tree to Boston each year as a symbol of gratitude for the help given after the explosion. This connection is important because it shows how disaster can create friendship between communities. Halifax was suffering, but it was not alone. People far away heard the news and acted. They did not only feel sympathy, They sent practical help. In a crisis, kindness must become action. Food, medicine, doctors, nurses, blankets, and shelter can mean the difference between life and death. The rescue work also showed how difficult recovery really is. After a disaster, people often think only about the first terrible moment. But for survivors, the hardest part can come later. They must find family members. They must bury the dead. They must treat wounds. They must rebuild homes. They must live with memories. Children who survived the explosion carried it into adulthood. People who lost their sight had to learn a new life. Families who lost parents, children, or homes could not simply return to normal. The Halifax explosion changed the city physically and emotionally. Streets had to be rebuilt. Homes had to be replaced. The injured needed long-term care. The dead had to be remembered. Investigations had to ask why it happened. People needed answers. But answers could not bring back what was lost. This is one of the hardest truths after any disaster. Repairing buildings is possible. Repairing human grief takes much longer. This is the fourth lesson from the Halifax explosion. In the worst moments, survival depends on warning, courage, and community. Vincent Coleman's message showed the power of one person's duty. The rescuers showed the strength of ordinary people. Boston's help showed that compassion can cross borders. Halifax was damaged deeply. But it was not abandoned. The city had been broken by fire and force. But its story did not end in ruins. In the next part, we will look at how Halifax rebuilt itself, what the disaster taught Canada, and why the memory of that morning still matters today after the Halifax explosion. The city faced a question that every disaster leaves behind. How do people begin again when so much has been lost? The blast had destroyed homes, damaged streets, injured thousands, and taken many lives. Families were broken. Neighborhoods were changed forever. The north end of Halifax, especially the Richmond area, had suffered terrible destruction. But after the smoke, fire, snow, and shock, people had to make decisions. They had to search, heal, rebuild. And remember, the first days after the explosion were filled with pain and confusion. Many people did not know where their family members were. Some children had lost parents. Some parents had lost children. Some people were badly injured and could not speak clearly. Hospitals and emergency shelters were crowded. Doctors, nurses, soldiers, volunteers, and neighbors worked for long hours. They treated wounds, gave food, found clothing, and tried to bring order to a city that had been broken in a single morning. Winter made everything harder. A disaster in warm weather is already terrible, but a disaster in a cold Canadian winter brings another level of danger. Many homes had no windows. Some homes no longer stood. People needed heat, blankets, coats, shoes, and shelter. Snow and freezing air made survival more difficult for the injured and homeless. Every broken wall and shattered window reminded people that rebuilding was not only about buildings, it was about keeping people alive through the next night. Relief came from many places. Communities across Canada sent help. Boston sent doctors, nurses, supplies, and support. This help became one of the most remembered parts of the story. Halifax and Boston formed a bond through tragedy. Years later, Nova Scotia would send a Christmas tree to Boston as a symbol of thanks. That tradition shows how one act of help can become a memory that lasts for generations. In a disaster, kindness can become history. Rebuilding Halifax was not quick. It required planning, money, labour, and patience. Streets had to be cleared. Homes had to be repaired or replaced. Public buildings needed attention. Families needed places to live. The injured needed long-term care. People who had lost sight from flying glass had to adjust to new lives. Workers who had lost tools, homes, or family members still had to find a way forward. A city can rebuild walls faster than it can rebuild confidence. The disaster also led to serious questions. How had a ship full of explosives been allowed so close to the city? Could the collision have been prevented? Were harbor rules strong enough? Was communication clear enough? In the days and months after the explosion, people wanted responsibility and answers. When a tragedy is this large, grief often turns into investigation. People do not only ask what happened, they ask why it was allowed to happen. The Halifax explosion became a lesson about risk in wartime ports. Dangerous cargo, busy traffic, narrow waterways, and unclear communication can create deadly conditions. A harbor is not only water and ships, it is a system. If that system fails, the result can reach far beyond the docks. The explosion showed that public safety depends on planning, rules, warnings, and respect for danger. Hidden risks cannot be treated like ordinary problems, but the legacy of the Halifax explosion is not only about rules, it is also about human courage. Vincent Coleman's warning became a symbol of duty. Rescue workers became symbols of service. Doctors and nurses became symbols of endurance. Ordinary citizens became symbols of neighbor helping neighbor. Boston's response became a symbol of friendship. These stories matter because they show that even when humans create disaster, humans can also respond with courage and compassion. The memory of the explosion also belongs to the people who suffered quietly after the headlines ended. Some survivors carried scars for the rest of their lives. Some lived with blindness, pain, or trauma. Some families never fully recovered from loss. Children who survived grew older with memories of fire, sound, glass, smoke, and missing voices. History often remembers dates and numbers, but survivors remember details: a broken room, a lost hand, a mother's call, a street that no longer looked the same. Today, the Halifax explosion remains one of the most important disaster stories in Canadian history. It reminds us that Canada's history is not only made of politics, wars, and famous leaders. It is also made of cities, workers, families, ports, volunteers, and ordinary people facing extraordinary moments. Halifax was damaged deeply, but it did not disappear. It rebuilt. It remembered. It carried the story forward. This is the final lesson from the Halifax explosion. A city can be destroyed in a moment, but rebuilding takes courage over time. The explosion showed the danger of war, the cost of poor communication, and the terrible power of hidden risk, but it also showed the strength of community, the importance of warning others, and the human ability to stand up again after disaster. More than 100 years later, the story still matters. We remember the 2 ships in the harbor. We remember the fire people did not understand. We remember the blast that broke part of the city. We remember Vincent Coleman's final warning. We remember the rescuers, the injured, the lost, and the people who rebuilt Halifax in the cold. The explosion was one of Canada's darkest mornings, but the response became a story of courage, memory, and hope. Thank you for listening to this story. Now, write one simple sentence in the comments. You can write, "I learned that Halifax rebuilt itself through courage, help, and memory." Keep listening, keep learning, and I will see you in the next story.